And then he goes on to say that he's met my father, Tim Hegg, before. He's had Erev Shabbat. He's been treated well by my family and the congregation I attend, and I admire, this is him now, quote, and I admire and respect him as a leader and a scholar. All of which added to my surprise when I realized in reading the introduction to the above quoted paper that he had made some glaring and erroneous assumptions. Once again, I want to say that we're not trying to bash Pyles here, personally or anything like that. This was brought to us by a listener who wants us to respond to this. Okay.
Plus, we know that it's a couple years old now. So.
It is a couple years old. So, however, it's still up on his site.
Right.
So, okay, he says, I can't think of anyone in Messianic Judaism who believes that the Mishnah we have today is a direct reflection of how Judaism or Judaisms functioned back in the late Second Temple period when Jesus walked among his people Israel. I have no idea, even after reading Tim's paper in full, where he got that idea. Certainly my drive to investigate the evolution of Judaism as it relates both to the ongoing authority of Judaism to define itself across time, whether or not first century halakha and modern halakha can be considered equally valid for the Judaism of their times, doesn't assume a fixed, static, and non-adaptive set of applications of Torah over a 2,000-year span. Okay, let's stop right there. Let's begin with this. This is interesting. So James Pyles has done work for FFOZ. I believe he's written stuff. Maybe he hasn't. I think he has, though. I think he's written some stuff for FFOZ. And then actually, what's interesting about this is this section right here, this paragraph right here, down in the comments section, the very first comment.
Wait, pause for a sec. Can I make a point?
Yeah, of course.
Could you read the title of your dad's paper, which was also he gave it as a conference also, but what was the title of your dad's paper?
What version of the Mishnah did Paul read?
Okay. It's already tongue-in-cheek. We have to understand that your dad is exaggerating a point. He's exaggerating the case to make a very important point. Right? I mean, that obviously, because even the person, it's going to jar the person saying, oh, wait a minute. The Mishnah didn't exist didn't exist yet, and let alone would it have existed in a written form that Paul would have sat down and read it.
Okay, so, but Pyle's first critique...
The very title shows that it's a caricature.
Okay, but Pyle's first critique of the paper is that no one in Messianic Judaism and no ministry that he knows of believes that the Mishnah...
Paul would have read the Mishnah.
That I think that he goes even farther. That the Mishnah cannot shed light on first century Judaism. That's what he's saying. He says, I can't think of anyone in Messianic Judaism who believes that the Mishnah we have today is a direct reflection of how Judaism or Judaisms functioned back in the late Second Temple period. So what he's saying is that no one's reading the Mishnah back into first century Judaism. So let's go to Exhibit A. Now, I'm not going to down this because this guy was kind enough to send this to me for free. I asked him about it on Twitter. He sent me a free copy of it. I know the guy. He's done artwork for my dad's book when my dad worked at FFOZ. He worked for FFOZ. He now runs a organization called Emet HaTorah. I'm not showing this to down this because I honestly have not listened to it yet. However, I have had some discussion back and forth with the person who did this about the name and what is the content of this. It's called Perkei Avot and the Teaching of Yeshua. So Emet HaTorah certainly is trying to read Perkei Avot, which is part of the Mishnah, the latest part of the Mishnah, nonetheless, back into the first century and say that Perkei Avot was certainly extant orally, at least parts of it were extant orally within Yeshua's time. Exhibit 2. This is my favorite one. Oh, now first
we have others too.
We have others too.
Just the people who call Paul Rav Shaul or Rabbi Shaul, they are taking later, Rav Shaul particularly. Paul never called himself a rabbi. I never called himself Rav, but I see that on the internet a lot, people doing that. I see people taking Metatron from even later post-Mishnah rabbinic world, even medieval rabbinic world and saying, oh, Yeshua's Metatron, and Metatron goes back, and it's like this whole picture. I mean, we see this kind of thing, or just like we saw in that movie. Remember the clip where Yeshua is citing Hillel? Yeshua is citing the Babylonian Talmud to some Pharisees. We saw that in that movie, Killing Jesus. Okay, so that's why your dad made the provocative title. That's why he gave it that title, to kind of jar people, to kind of see the silliness of it. Why? Because then people can go, oh, okay, I guess it is out there. We do see where people have taken, they imagine Yeshua being a sage of the Babylonian Talmud, arguing Gemara. So
look, okay. So Boaz Michael jumps in. Boaz is the president and CEO of FFOZ, First Fruits of Zion. He says, "I know of not one Messianic Jewish ministry or teacher that holds the position Tim puts forward." He's talking about exactly what Pyles just said. Okay. Now, I know that we're still on the first paragraph here, but I would like to give you Exhibit 2. This from Restoration by D. Thomas Lancaster, published by First Fruits of Zion, page 138, bottom of the page. When the Mishnah was compiled in the late 2nd century and early 3rd century, these traditions, talking of the traditions within the Mishnah, these traditions were incorporated into the document and thereafter became definitive for Judaism. In the days of Yeshua, and the apostles, though, such traditions were just traditions, variously practiced, accepted, and argued. Yeshua himself lived by, and even through his compliance, endorsed the majority of Jewish tradition. Speaking of the Jewish tradition within the Mishnah. At times, however, he shoved tradition aside. His criteria for doing so were based upon the literal commandments of the written Torah. When a tradition contradicted the written commandment of God, the master regarded that tradition as void. A classic example of this is the hand washing in Mark 7. So, although Boaz Michael and James Pyles, who Pyles has done work for FOZ, they say that they know of not one ministry that does this. I would put forward that FFOZ clearly does this. Not only that, but you brought up yesterday when we were discussing this, Rob. You brought up the fact that they have published the Lebertov, who does that all the time.
Oh yeah, they're using the Zohar and using rabbinic text to try to, and Levertov did that. Levertov is one of the Messianic luminaries, promoted. If you read, he's got a book that's in Hebrew about the life and times of Paul. He mixes the Talmud in as if that was the education system that Paul went through. I mean, there's a lot of anachronism going on there, and I like some of what you read there from that book. That Lancaster. I mean, at least he does say that the Mishnah proper was compiled. He's given somewhat of an accurate view of what the majority of historical scholarship would assert.
Okay,
however,
but
I would say that the hand washing of the Pharisees is very different than the hand washing that we find later in the
Mishnah.
That there are two different. The ideology of an oral Torah that goes back to Moses at Sinai was just not part of the world of the Pharisees, and there's issues with that. And I think another angle is that there are people in the Messianic world. Now, I know I've encountered them. I just to be upfront, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure I could find it. That read Acts 15 as the Noahide laws.
Oh yeah, and that's
now
the
they
other
might
point.
not be. I can't think of any particular Messianic ministry off the top of my head, but I know there are popular teachers. I think Dr. Keener might be one of them.
He is, and but Lancaster does it himself.
Who will equate the Noahide laws with Acts 15. And that's another example of anachronism.
I got quotes right here from Lancaster talking about the Noahide laws in Acts 15. Leave it to our chat room to come up with a to come up with a ministry that certainly does teach exactly what Pyles says no ministry does. Joe Good. Joe Good's ministry is completely founded on the idea that the Mishnah was extant and is speaking directly of the first century.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So I think those guys are, the idea that it's not out there, I think it's, it is. It's out there. And the reason...
You don't want to admit it, but it's out there.